gentlemen, good morning. I feel an immense pleasure to participate in the 10th World Conference on Bioethics and to be able to testify my attachment in the works of the CB. This conference is always organized with excellence for many years. Great and sincere thanks to all the organizers, and particularly Dr. Palacios for all the efforts he makes every time to make impossible possible. I thank him for his kindness and generosity, and I express him my deep congratulations as well as my feeling of sincere gratitude of my status as Vice President. It's for me an honor and a pleasure. The CB has many experiences and skills. It's a place of exchange and debate in which we are all concerned and engaged. And this time, the conference is about youth and protection of the environment, which is a current topic. I remain convinced that the faith, intelligence, and imagination create the dynamism and can offer a large perspective to our actions. I hope that our motivation will be the key to promote the bioethics in the respect of human rights. I am ending my speech by thanking again all the organizers wishing a great success to this 10th edition of World Conference on Bioethics. And without delay, I give the speech to the first speaker, Mr. José Manuel Silvero Valls from Paraguay. I speak to transhumanism and care of the environment.
Muy buenos días.
Hello, good morning to everybody. Firstly, I would like to thank the International Society of Bioethics for making it possible for me to be here today with you. The topic of my speech, my lecture, is transhumanism and the environment. Apart from the eternal issues related to this, the human beings have always been concerned with this. Since times of Socrates and even today, we refer to ourselves, we insist on delving into the questions to give meaning to our existence and to everything that surrounds us. Undoubtedly, we are seekers of the truth. Although often, as human beings, we have been impelled to look for safer aspects and cardinal axioms. Our path seeks the firm paving mixed with intervals of rationality. Even so, the human being requires explanations as today and as it will always be. But something is changing. Something is emerging, and we have to bear it in mind. We can say that there have been changes. These changes are emerged in the future, and these will lead us to faraway ports than those that we are used to. This is the possibility of radical transformation of the human species. The singularity is ongoing, in progress, so the leap that we are going to take is irreversible. The enthusiastic say that artificial intelligence will provide us with extraordinary skills, capacities, whose social, political, economic, and ethical effects cannot be ignored. Paradoxically, the artifice, the key of the truth, has been converted into being, it can be programmed. Technology will invade our bodies and will convert our bodies into something technological. The more enthusiastic believe that technology will dominate, and then a new era will be born, where not the biological intelligence, and that will spread throughout the whole universe with the force of thinking without obstacles. On top of this, the engineers say that the 21st century will be remembered as the freedom, the liberation of people from its change. And then intelligence will be able to work in integrated bodies. And here the old seekers of truth will see how our logical skills, capacities, will change. And when that happens, we will see that we have been conquered by or with the possibility of updating our brains or upgrading our brains, leading with the support of the Silicon Valley, writers of Boston. The ideas are the source of debates throughout the planet. But between gurus, prophets, an interesting concept has arisen, an alternative maybe to everything new that has occurred. In the global European study of the year 2050, we see the possibility of an innovation that leads us to harmonize technology and mankind without any trauma. Apart from the Cartesian cause effect, this will lead to new sciences based on social innovation that will integrate with other synthetic sciences, and this change, regardless of the variables and names, will have an effect on the model for coming centuries. There is no doubt that this will require resources, adaptations, and the actual capacities of the people. So we have to ask two questions. Are we facing new and peculiar ways of consumption, exploitation, surveillance? Or without knowing it, are we facing a cognitive revolution that cannot be compared with anything else? Bioethics has a lot of conceptual elements and criteria in these topics that are different from everyday activities and everyday topics of debates and proposals. The disruptive ideas lead us to, we have to understand the impact of all of this. Therefore, we must remember the German Martin Sass brought light to the origin of the word bioethics. One of the texts of this researcher moved the basis of the history of the discipline and required it to a correction this anthropocentric conception of bioethics that still exists today and whose objective built the possibility of understanding this rather than the bioclinical aspects. Potter was the father, according to him, and with respect to the historical concept where the discipline rise, Sass said that the bioethics goes back 4 decades, more specifically to 1947. At that time, a Protestant preacher had published an article called Bioethics, a perspective on ethics of human beings with animals and plants. Sass researches the historical context of the term, analyzing to the conditions of the time, and then writing down the reasons for bioethics in the German society between the 2 great wars. He clearly saw a bioethical imperative based on the categorical imperative of Kant. The bioethics, then, is the idea of responsibility that goes beyond compassion. And Jahr says that the insensitivity to any form of life could compromise the existence of the actual human environment, and also stated the defending the life in its broadest spectrum. I'm going to give 3 examples of my country. I am from Paraguay in South America, and I wanted to talk about 3 things that are occurring at this present time. In the Paraguay, an area in Paraguay that is times of big data, hyperconnectivity. What we are doing is destroying more than 1,000 hectares, 1,033, in fact, hectares every day. And we're not just destroying the trees, we are destroying ways of life, or forms of life, rather, that had lived for centuries in equilibrium, in harmony. The second example is just discouraging as well. The aquifer that we compare, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, is the 3rd reservoir of groundwater, the largest, 3rd largest rather, in the world. 1,090 square meters. It is a space that is even bigger than what Spain, France, and Portugal altogether. This aquifer runs the risk of depletion, especially of the recharge of drinking water, due to the lack of responsibility. We are contaminating all the water courses. And the 3rd example is an emblematic lake. There are songs that remind us of that lake. This blue lake is totally green. Maybe it could look like the Incredible Hulk, which is just as green due to the contamination of cyanobacteria. So, due to this bioethics that was defended by Jahr, they strengthen the fight for life in its different forms, both the natural environments, the cultural, etc. And so we should ask ourselves what the post-human would be correct or not, bearing in mind these examples. Let us not forget that Jahr, together with Kant, that the human being is a purpose, and it should be treated as such. You know, Langer, who's an American thinker, in one of his books says that the idea of paradise would, in Silicon Valley, we would have to consider life beyond our limits. And he said the metaphysics of Silicon Valley, the idea of heaven. We consider that we will achieve immortality through biomechanics, the belief that throughout this century, perhaps in 1 or 2 centuries, the human beings, maybe not all of them, will be immortal in the virtual reality stored in the computer servers or in the cloud. Or if we continue to have a physical presence, we will be immersed in a world that is dominated by robotics. We will, even the poorest of us will live like magicians. We will not have to explicitly express what we want from the world, because the computational clouds will have such precise models that it will know what we want. And that's where we close the quote. And so he proposes traveling to the future and evaluating the importance of water. And this is another quote. Let us imagine the following. A few years have gone by in the 21st century, and you're on a beach. The bird comes and talks to you and says, maybe you're interested in knowing that at that specific time, the nanorobotics are repairing the cardiac valve. And who say that you're going to have a heart problem? This operation will be done in a casino that has paid for this bird message. So there's an automatic operation through Google or other company. And when the wind blows, what seem like leaves were robots that have been created by bioengineering that take advantage to prepare a protection around you. The desires and needs are automatically reviewed, and the robot starts to work on your body while you hear the wind blowing around you. You are sitting next to the sea, or wherever this coast is. The spots of dust that are flying through the air are robots. And the announcers told us a long time about artificial dust. So whenever you say something, you talk, I'm thirsty, for example, you get something to drink. Your potential is not good enough for any of our sponsors to pay for drinking water. I've got a cent, he says. No, water costs 2 cents. We're a meter away from the sea. You could desalinate the water. No, that can't be done. That can only be done by the companies that are authorized to do so. But you can get free of charge any film about history, pornography, or simulating a dead relative and interact with that person while you die of dehydration. We will post your death. Wouldn't you like to spend that last cent in the casino that has repaired your heart? Maybe you could win a prize, and you could enjoy it, or even buy a bit of water. That was the end of the quote. At the present time, bioethics and its many topics, many thinkers, may help us relocate the place that should be occupied by the destiny of the human being. Potter defined an anatropic ethics, all human beings as objects. The human being is the only center for bioethics. Unfortunately, the ideas of the American oncologists have gone from text to praxis, especially in the political issues regarding health, for example. The possibility of bioethics opening up in its broadest sense was based on good faith. Maybe today we should talk about water again, talk about plants, animals, in the same way that we're talking about human beings, post-human beings and the new technologies. Maybe today the time has come to talk about the care of life in its broadest sense. From Asturias, the natural paradise, where the green water animals have a singular value. And maybe this is the right place to claim, to demand the documents that have come from Sibi and Dr. Palacios. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an interesting speech. And the next speaker is Mrs. Vitulia Ivon from Italia. She speaks from European principles of protection of the environment and the fate of future generations. He's not here.
Perdón, es que la segunda conferenciante.
Apologies, the second speaker could not make it. She has some family issues. And now I will give the floor to Ms. Carme Valls, Director of a program called Women, Health and Life Quality of the CAPS, Barcelona. Her presentation will address environment and health of youth prevention strategies. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
Good morning. We're going to talk briefly about relationships between the environment, youth health, and a little bit about prevention strategies, trying to relate or interrelate two aspects: the relationship of maleficency and justice to be taken into account by society and public policies with regard to development of human being from the very first conception to youth, based on the current scientific know-how. That will be the first part of my presentation. And then, second item, the change of behaviors in youth, taking into account the personal autonomy, but acting on the basis of the principle of social beneficency, focused on the improvement of life conditions of population in a balance with environment, and promoting human rights in a plural society. First question mark. What are the political ethics aspects, environmental aspects, and health aspects that should be imbricated in the actions of our professionals and managers of health to know how to protect our youth from the new risks they face from the birth to the full physical and mental development? There is an author, Rachel Carson, I don't know whether you've heard of her. She wrote a book called A Silent Spring. She's a North American author. She had breast cancer, and she realized that in spring no birds were heard. It was a silent spring. Why? Because insecticides had killed insects, and that is the main foodstuff for birds. So spring did not sing, birds did not sing. And she said, and I quote, "First time in history, today all human being is exposed to contact with hazardous chemical products from birth to death." And this is a reality that affects you the younger you are, because there is a greater amount of chemical compounds in the ambience, in the environment. However, everybody born after 1945 already were affected by DDT that was being marketed at that time. What about toxic compounds? Well, they come into our body through air, water, foodstuff, cosmetics, cleaning products, domestic environment, working environment, and electromagnetic fields. Briefly, let's talk about air pollution. Air pollution. This is very plural event. Factories, plants, whatever may happen with fires, what may happen with cars, traffic, diesel, incineration, air fumigation of the fields, all that pollutes the air with an increase in dioxide and carbon dioxide, and that is what we breathe in. And that will also affect and have a negative impact on the fetus. Another pollution, water pollution. This has been addressed by our colleague from Paraguay. Aquifers, pollution. For example, when you fumigate a field and they penetrate the fields, the plots. But pollution, or the waste that we throw into the water, for example, right now there has been a great campaign to try to avoid the throwing away of plastic onto the seas. But there are seas of plastics in the ocean. And I think that some other youngsters has been able to develop a methodology to dissolve the plastics. However, coral is becoming whiter and whiter because of the effect of carbon dioxide, and that is acidificating the waters. And that is affecting the balance, water, soil, but it is also affecting the life of fish because they are introducing or eating plastics. And then we will eat fish, so you can imagine. But there are some polluting compounds on soil. In 2005 already, the Stockholm Convention was signed. It was endorsed in 2005, signed in 2001, and defined 12 products of priority elimination. So we needed to eliminate them as a priority because they were very toxic, because the human body could not eliminate them once inside the human body. These are the products. You have them in there on the slide. Persistent organic pollutants, in English POPs, persistent organic pollutants, as we said, aldrin, PCB, chlordane, DDT, etc. Well, think that DDT, once it's introduced in the human body, it will stay there from 35 to 40 years, and it cannot be eliminated. So there are some insecticides that stay in our body, and they act as a toxic substance against the cells and the nucleus, but also they change the hormonal balance. And what was defined in 2005 as persistent organic pollutants has become now endocrine disruptors, ED in English. A substance that once introduced in the human body may alter some other hormonal function of the human body. For example, ovary functions, testicle function, brain, etc., and other glands. And what are those products? Well, dioxins, or phthalates, or flame retardants, polychloride and phenols that are in the tins of the plastic in the tins, pesticides, hydrocarbides, cytoestrogens, and also heavy metals. All these products that are being studied have been demonstrated to alter the hormonal function. And when do they affect people? Well, just before birth, because these products have an impact on the ovilus and spermatozoid during conception or during birth, during the fetal life, during the first 3 years of life, childhood, and adolescence. These are the most critical periods. I will now move on informing you about the consequences for human health regarding embryonic development and conception, prematurity and low weight at birth, alterations in genitals and reproductive health in men, genital alterations and reproductive health in women, precocious puberty, and multigenerational and transgenerational effects. In fetal development, there are many kids that are born with a low weight, a decrease in the cranial perimeter, also spontaneous abortions, increase in congenital malformations, increase in anencephalia, and also presence of other diseases. But there is a special effect or impact when exposed to herbicides. In 1976, this happened in Silvero in Italy. There was an explosion, and in the nearby village, there was a great exposition to these herbicides because of this accident, this event. 1 year after, or for a year, in that nearby village, no kid was born. Only girls, but no boys. The boy, as it is an ED, endocrine disruptor, it did not allow for the birth of boys. It was an unfortunate event, but it was demonstrated, this relationship. And some years after, 12, 13, 14 years after, the girls who had been born in that village presented 3 times more endometriosis than the rest of the population. Endometriosis is a disease by which the tissue of the uterus is spread out in the whole cavity, and that is a reason for sterility. There are many other of these events, and they are being followed up. There is a neurological effect of these insecticides as well, which is related to the delay of the neurons, development of neurons of the fetus. And when the mother is exposed to these insecticides, then the fetus will have an alteration in the brain architecture, in the memory circuits. And these alterations will be maintained all throughout until they are teenagers or adults, and these subjects will have memory losses and lower capacity to gain skills. Only when you're exposed to those products, when you're still a fetus in your mom's tummy. Another second issue has to do with prematurity and low weight at birth. The prematurity is a risk factor of morbidity and mortality worldwide. And low weight at birth, defined as a weight equal or lower than 2,500 grams, is accompanied by prematurity and the development of a delayed uterine, or what we call small for gestational age. There are epidemiological evidences that show that prenatal exposure to lead, glycol, cadmium, mercury, and chemical compounds is related to prematurity and low weight at birth, and many other organic solvents that are used by cleaners, restorers, etc., is related to the greater prevalence of kids with low weight at birth. For example, 18.2% as opposed to 11.5% among those people who are not exposed to these compounds. But it has been surprising, the studies in the last 10 years that show a relationship between low weight at birth of boys and girls with air pollution. There is between maybe 15 and 20% more probabilities that babies are born with a lower weight in Holland than in Vancouver, where quality of air is much better. And this low weight also has consequences in adulthood, because then adults are more obese and have more diabetes. And there are more cognitive deficiency in those kids that attend schools that are closer to high polluted streets. This is being studied by a group of experts led by Sanya. Low weight of birth is also related to cognitive development. There will be a greater risk of morbidity and mortality in adulthood, and it's also a predictor of problems in childhood, respiratory problems, immunological issues, the central nerve system problems, intellectual learning problems, etc., etc. Furthermore, there are alterations in genitals in adult men, because external development of genitals has been exposed to environmental endocrine disruptors. For example, cryptorchidea, for example, that testicles are smaller, and they go up and down, and the testicles, they always should be inside the bags. Well, this disease is increasing in the high polluted areas. The hypospadias, that is that the urethra does not open at the lower part of the penis, the tip, but rather at the lower part, correction me, speaker. This alteration is increased by the relationship with endocrine disruptors. It has been proved that the quality of spermatozoids in semen in 20 to 40% of young people in Europe is decreasing, has been decreasing in the last 20 years. And testicle cancer is on the up. I'm not explaining the apocalypse, I'm just explaining to you a reality so that you take into account the actions to be implemented in the future. As preventive measures, the effects of EDs in the fetus has already been explained. Hypospadias, other disorders, and women, for example, the exposure of mothers to these compounds, or the fetus when they are inside the mom, could also have very bad consequences in adulthood, as well as prematurity and low weight at birth. Alterations found in genitals and reproductive health of women. Let's think that most of them are liposoluble, and the women body accumulates 15% more of fat tissue than men. So in women's body, there is a possibility of greater accumulation than in men. The EDs in women will cause more alterations in menstruation, premenstrual syndrome, excess in menstruations or greater, and uterus or uterine fibromas. So in consequence, when exposed to EDs, we may have the following disorders: early menarche, early menopausia, before 45 years of age, excess of menstruation, female sterility, endometriosis, alteration of thyroidal function, multiple chemical sensitivity, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, breast cancer, diabetes, obesity, and finally, the pancreas cancer. And exposure of parents to insecticides will result in an increase of cancers in children, and testicle cancers, ovary cancer, etc., etc. We may think it is a divine, unfortunate event, but no, this is being caused by human beings' actions on the environment. A couple of aspects: early puberty. In Spain, experts in pediatrics have already warned about this fact. In girls only 8 or 9 years of age, in some areas in Spain, the presence of breast button around 7 years of age. And early puberty is related to the exposure to benefials, dioxins, polybromated ethers, DDTs, DDEs, etc., etc. Menarche is also a risk factor for breast cancer. And the last consequence that I think is the most severe and the most demanding regarding our responsibility of human beings. I don't know whether you know this story. The story of the DES. It is an estrogen, a synthetic estrogen used in the 50s to avoid that women could cause an abortion. But 12, 11 years after, the girls who had been born out of mothers who had been fed this product developed a rare cancer in the vagina. This vagina cancer was taken into account by the FDA, and they decided that this product should be forbidden, and it was forbidden. But to our surprise, the survivors of this cancer, the daughters, when they were 11, 12, 13 years of age, they have reproduced this cancer again. Thus, there is a transgenerational effect of this product that we put in our bodies, and 14, 16, 20 years after it is reproduced in the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. It has also been demonstrated with other products apart from DDAs, for example, DDT, methoxychloro, and other dioxins. And there are some works being done that aim at warning about the expression of transcription factors that go from one generation to the next one. This is a scientific scenario right now regarding the consequence of the environment on the health of our kids. What can we do, therefore? What are the aspects in terms of changes in ethics, behaviors, and habits should be promoted among our youngsters to protect, preserve, and improve the quality of the environment? I'm going to urge the youth to collaborate with us and to be more active. I have summarized some of the paragraphs of the book I have just published in terms of preventive measures. Tomorrow, our presentation will address this topic. First, collective participation in the benefit of the community regarding reduction of waste production, reuse of products that are now being withdrawn, and recycling of waste to a maximum level. This is a basic issue to live in a planet without plastic and without many other wastes that are also polluting our planet. Second, to carry out responsible consumption to avoid air pollution. Many measures in this regard. For example, to consume green and natural products, reduce the consumption of plastics, avoid products treated with herbicides, reduce consumption of products that may issue volatile pollutants, use of public transport, avoid the use of private car or sharing car, avoid the use of fossil fuels, for example, avoid diesel, check or double-check the air conditioning systems, etc., etc. Responsible consumption to avoid air pollution. Third, responsible consumption to prevent water pollution, to get to know the materials of our pipelines in our homes, to change the plastic and lead or PVC pipelines by others of clay, for example, or copper, observe the condition of pipelines, and do not eliminate any waste or very dirty products, for example, the pads or oils. All that has to be eliminated or thrown away at green spots or green points. And this should not be left to our mothers. Mothers already have a lot of work to do. We all should be responsible. Even the youngsters also have to collaborate in terms of responsible consumption. Third, to promote responsible food and reduce pollution of food. For example, avoid or reduce the intake of food treated with herbicides or those that have been taken or brought to us from very far away. Yeah? So that is the avoid, for example, pre-cooked food, avoid water or juices in plastic bottles, avoid food with a lot of sugar, and consume non-processed food. And finally, promotion, consumption, responsible consumption and cleaning in the house and at the workplace, to buy green products that are cheap and not pollutant, prefer natural tissues, avoid synthetic tissues, because many times all these fabrics have been treated with some compounds, not to use cosmetics that contain bisphenol A or phthalates, and to know the main pollutants of these kind of products and avoid them. This is a very brief summary, general summary. Many other measures could be implemented, but this is my summary for today. We think youngsters are a hope for the future, and we are looking forward to the youngsters to be more responsible in terms of consumption, to take advantage of our science, to change attitudes and behaviors in their own benefit and also the benefit of the whole society. I have summarized all these contents in a book entitled Environment and Health that was published this year. And we should know that right now we have to change our attitudes. We need to have more knowledge. We need to know the toxics that have some consequences on our health and how to prevent. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And these are my contact addresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next is Mrs. Carme Valls. No? Ah, c'est vous. Et l'autre, si. Et l'autre, elle n'est pas là. Ah, c'est l'autre, d'accord.
Bueno, muchas gracias a los...
Thank you so much to Professor Silvero Arevalos and Carme Valls for the excellent presentations. Undoubtedly, after having listened to them, I am afraid to say that we are in a world threatened by genetics, robotics, and dominated by products used to live in our natural environment, pesticides, herbicides, toxic compounds of the fuels. And I think we need to have a ray of hope, no? Well, we're now going to have some time for debate. I'm going to ask the youngsters not to get frightened. Carme has already given us some clues in terms of preventive measures. And now if anyone would like to ask questions to any of the two speakers, the floor is open. Dr. Ponta, always very strongly committed to public health. Probably he has something to say. It's to break the ice. Unfortunately, we have no audio here in the booth. They need to speak on a microphone. Thank you very much to both the speakers. Highly interesting presentations. I'd like to ask Dr. Carme Valls, what's your opinion about an alternative proposed as opposed to incineration, that is to generate compounds, what is called, if I recall well, CRT or CRC, I do not remember well, says the speaker. They are solid waste. It is a system of decompression and dehydration of waste for the later incineration. I've read somewhere, for example, Greenpeace mentions that it is an alternative to incineration, but that it is still incineration, just another modality. I'd like to know your opinion about this controversy. Do you know anything about that? What's your opinion? Well, Carlos, well, firstly, it seemed easy to think that we were going to incinerate the waste and things were going to go great. But we didn't know that when you incinerate plastics or tires of cars, what happened in Cesena, near Madrid, or many other places, all that results in many more pollutants. And nobody's going to do an epidemiological follow-up. What will happen to the girls in Cesena with their menstruations? Someone should do it. So what you mentioned is one of the alternatives. There is some other researcher who has worked on some bacteria that can digest plastic and do away with the plastic. Any measure that avoids incineration may be good right now, when urban areas are so much polluted. In Barcelona, for example, someone wanted to put an incineration plant in the middle of the city. It also pollutes this kind of incineration because the human body carries away mercury in the mouth or heavy metals. So if you incinerate, that goes into the environment. I follow up these methodologies. We have also thought about drafting best practice manual to think about alternatives. Recycling is very important because if you already have because with plastic remains, other things have been made, no, useful things. Instead of throwing it away into the oceans, you could use that plastic and manufacture other useful products. And the maximum reduction of plastic is also positive, but we have to, well, take all this information with a little bit of care, okay, because these are just preliminary studies. And at the university, they are working on these topics as well. There are many initiatives by youngsters. For example, this young person who has proposed a system to eliminate that plastic oil from the Pacific that is as big as the whole of Spain. Imagine. Nobody knew how to do away with that plastic in the ocean, but now a new system will be applied to collect all that plastic. It is very interesting what the young people is offering now, the new alternatives that they are offering. I will follow it up, but I cannot say much more. Thank you so much, Dr. Valls. Two persons want to say something. Yeah, Moliga Rafa from Brazil. A question to Dr. Silvero regarding transhumanism is also a difficult issue. We know, for example, that the pharmaceutical companies, the biotechnological novelties, and the whole development are huge. 3/4 of the population do not have access to the benefits of that technological development because the market is perverse. They define the research depending on the profits, on the potential profits, and they do not take into account the diseases, disorders, etc., etc. Transhumanism is an issue of concern, and I think we should relate it to poverty, the social, the people who are socially excluded. I'd like you to address this topic, the future of transhumanism and its relationship to poverty and social exclusion.
Profesor Garrafa, su pregunta es muy interesante.
A very interesting question. And this takes me to a biologist, Mr. Silva, in the 90s said, or in a book, or wrote in a book, that we're going to have genetically enriched human beings in the short term and therefore genetically impoverished. When the journalist asked what that meant, that means what technology can be paid for, they're going to be enriched. But those that can't pay for the technology, in comparison, are going to be genetically impoverished citizens. With transhumanism, the same thing occurs, especially because there are several groups. There are more moderate groups, more important groups led by Ray Kurzweil, and they are located in the University of Singularity. This university was sponsored by Google, NASA and Apple, the three industries. And of course, I don't know how much they have to pay for a course in Brasilia, but we'd have to look at how much a 10-hour course costs at the University of Singularity to see that things one can pay for, others that cannot be paid for based on our reality. Related to how this could be compared with our situation, the Guaranis have certain reflections, and if we look at it calmly, we maybe could say that it's post-humanism, going beyond the limitations of human beings, not through robotics, but through solidarity, through the commitment, through respect to the environment and the surroundings. There are studies that show that they have had access to a much higher quality of life due to a well-established system and due to some criteria that, based on the arrogant Western world, we don't consider to be scientific enough. But personally, I don't think that in Latin America we can presume of technological singularity as something that is valid, not just due to the cost, but because of political, ethical aspects, questions. We have got tremendous needs that require the committed distribution of our citizens. Paraguay produces food for 70 million inhabitants, and Paraguay doesn't have more than 7 million. And 10% of our citizens are undernourished. So how can you explain that? That a legally organized state has those deficiencies. These are the great challenges that are related to a broader policy in terms of bioethics. So why do we talk about transhumanism? Well, they're fashionable, in vogue, and I think it is a political and ethical responsibility to know about it, to learn about it, to have the possibility to criticize it. In Latin America, we have other needs. We have other emergencies, and maybe we would have alternatives if we could discuss this. To the roboticization in Latin America, and the best political strategy to cope with the major needs is through solidarity, responsibility, walking together, and having a community perspective. Thank you very much, Professor Silvero. We've got another question from Mr. Maestro in the center. Microphone, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate Dr. Valls for her presentation, very interesting presentation. And we have sent out into the environment all sorts of particles over many years. We don't even know 1% of the consequences of these new compounds. We don't know how they're going to respond. And the endocrine disruptors are just another compound, but there are many more. The regulations, the laws that protect us, talk more and more about scientific evidence, the possibility to show scientifically that something is toxic or harmful, and that considerably delays the launch or the putting into practice of new knowledge. The question is, do you think, Carme, that the legislation on protection today against chemicals, for example, they will talk about electromagnetic fields later on, but now I'd like to know your opinion on the effects of this, of the legislation rather, on chemicals. Thank you, Seferin. I didn't talk about electromagnetic fields because I knew that you were going to talk about that later on. I haven't talked about that because that wasn't my mission at this round table, but from the chemical viewpoint, we think you have to be very cautious regarding this legislation because It is based in part on the European directives, although we don't apply them all. 80% of the laws we've got today are European laws, but often we don't apply them in our daily lives. Even so, the European directives say that any product that has been potentially toxic, if we don't know that it can actually affect human health, it will be suspended. There's been an initiative, a European initiative, to reevaluate chemicals, but even so, as you know, Nicolas Olea has always explained the effects of estrogens and many substances that can produce breast cancer have not been accepted in this initiative. At the present time in Europe, what we evaluate if a substance can cause cancer, the fetus, for example, the subtle effects on the development of intelligence or on the growth of adolescence is being done by specific research groups. In Denmark, Dr. Andersen is following a group of boys and girls that were born from mothers who had been working in a greenhouse when the fetuses were 3 months old, and they found alterations in the growth hormone. So there is one aspect of science that is way ahead. There are other scientists who are lagging behind, and others who are lagging even further behind, who don't apply the legislation or the directives. We do need legislation, and you'll explain that regarding the electromagnetic fields, but we have to demand the principle of caution. But when you start to find cases in working conditions, specific working conditions or clusters that can be identified or studied better, we have been able to see the relationship of toxic that exists. And there are studies by Nicolas Olea with placenta, pregnant women in Andalusia, the toxic products in blood. But we still need a lot of legislation. We need will that goes against the political and chemical and cosmetic interests. The parabens that were included as an ingredient are estrogens. And the cosmetic industry has opposed this study. We've only managed to get Europe not to authorize parabens in moisturizing creams and shampoos, but they haven't forbidden it. But really, we should be able to warn people that these are estrogens. And a lot of boys are using this because it can cause dystrophy of the testicles or breast cancer. At least they should be informed. But we've got a long path ahead of us. I expect a lot from the young people here. Thank you, Dr. Valls. You've given us some information of the deficit because of the speaker that is missing, who was going to talk about legislation and European principles of protection of the environment. Good morning. I would like to ask Dr. Carme Valls a question. Good morning. I'm not going to ask my question regarding my work, but I want to talk about the crypto orchids and if there are studies about the relationship between with the use of medicinal products, because you talk about the endocrine disruptors, a publication of 2010, they appeared in your presentation, but I am familiar with a case of a woman who took medicinal products and both male children were born with that malformation. That isn't by chance. As we are just starting off, I would like to, if you could talk a little bit more about that. And I would like to know if this is mentioned in your book. Well, firstly, there are medications that are endocrine disruptors, And in these products, they also use disruptors. I've seen antibiotics, proteins that have parabens. So maybe you can be taking a protein to feel better, but they include an endocrine disruptor, vitamin A, for example, that I think has been taken off the market now. But I remember one that the cause effect is very difficult to establish. Even though this woman had the 2 boys, it may be related to the medication, but it may not. We mustn't forget the disruptors because we are breathing them, we are eating them, we are drinking them, and we do this every day. So to be able to know about this more specifically, you would have to take a blood test of the woman. And all of this is very complicated, and I do agree that there are medications that can act as endocrine disruptors. I have included this in my book, but it's not a Bible. I've talked about a lot of things, and I've tried to talk about prevention, things that all of us can do, and explain what we know now. Because if it is denied as a disease, I try to include all this in my book. Thank you very much, Doctor. Another question? Hello? I wanted to refer to the presentation by my Paraguayan colleague. There is a very important topic, and that is the social responsibility of scientists regarding the dissemination of knowledge, regarding the positive, negative effects both of medication and products used in agriculture. It is important for that reason. We all know that they have created interest in the pharmaceutical industry. We all know that this industry is the second in importance regarding turnover in the world. The first, of course, is military. They favor the consumption of certain products, and it also acts negatively to prevent the scientists from giving an opinion on the matter, so the public have no information at all about all of this. The media are associated with the interest created, and this is very serious. It is essential the scientists should clearly inform about these topics. Say this is positive, this is negative, this should be studied in greater depth. On the contrary, there are certain opinions that are really negative in all senses. For example, the sowing the soy, to have a greater production. There's a reason to believe that phosphate is a negative aspect for agriculture. But there are a lot of opinions regarding its positive aspects. So here the scientists must say, this has not been sufficiently studied, and this is something that people must know about. Sowing the soy in certain countries, I don't know what can happen in the future, but this is a time bomb. It is essential to demand ask the scientists to explain about all of this, and we take note of that. I think there's a young person over there. Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate both speakers, especially special thanks to Dr. Valls for her work and her commitment to disseminate all of the effects on the environment, of the environment rather, on health, and especially focusing on the vulnerability of women in all of this. My specific question is related to what do you think about the tea tree essence? This is a product that is very good, who's going to suspect any negative aspects. It's recommended in many schools to avoid contagion of fleas. And this is something disseminated. On the other hand, it has been shown that it has an endocrine disruptor. So my consultation, I have found patients and I recommend them to stop using it. And in that case, the symptoms disappeared. But the authorities told me that there wasn't sufficient evidence to make any specific communication. So I would like to know your opinion on this product. Could you give me your name? Isolina Miraño. You are right. This is a question that informed patients have asked me. I was told that the tea tree could help, and I said that we could only be sure if it is ecological or not. If it's a tea tree that's been cultivated without pesticides. But today, a lot of the natural products have risks. Half of the population are taking megastrias because the omega-3 taken from fish have mercury. And so this product is very healthy, very expensive, but very healthy, I really don't know. But what about the mercury? And in the tea tree that is been distilled, it seems that as it's used for fleas, it's got, and I always say, wash the hair of your children well. And we all know fleas are very contagious, but as soon when they have fleas, use a product that isn't as toxic. We used in our time Lindane. Lindane is a toxic product as much as DDT, and it went into their blood, and we now know all of this. Now the authorities must learn the principle of caution. And they say, I must be cautious with practically everything, and I said, yes. You authorize the sale of one thing or another. What we have to do is warn the population that it may be toxic. So I think you're right in saying no. And could I say a couple of things more regarding what you've said? I'm sorry, the professor? The conflict of interest is so clear that medicine, Carlos Ponte is here, the no thanks movement of the doctors who put a label on no thanks to the laboratory, don't show me anymore, I'm going to look into it myself. So we are seeing that this is very useful, and also the action of students to avoid conflict of interest. And two very exciting cases have come out, and we've had to establish a rule. A doctor, for example, that gives a presentation have to say if they've been paid by industry or not. And a Catalan professor, I'm throwing stones on my own roof here, this Dr. Vaselga had to resign because 60 works he'd done, he didn't say that he'd been paid by industry. So now we have to know when Trump won the elections, for example, which two industries whose shares increased. The weapons and pharmaceutical industry. The shares shot up in a couple of days. They knew that it was fertile earth, and everyone has to look at the scientific journals. There are two young people over there, boy and a girl, who want to ask a couple of questions. Hello. This is a shorter question. It's for both speakers. If you think that the human being has sacrificed nature in favor of his false community. Silvero? There is a very interesting debate in nature and culture. And we can see this in history of philosophy as a constant feature. We have sacrificed nature in benefit of well-being. But there is a very important question that we must bear in mind, and that is the limits. Everything that goes beyond certain reasonable limits are going to have consequences. In my country, we've got millions and millions of hectares. And I've had access to images shown to me by students from schools, primary schools. At the playing ground, soy had been grown, cultivated in the playgrounds. They dismantled a cemetery to cultivate soy bean. They didn't just change the whole history of the area. What they did was this affected all the children in the communities. There was no possibility of establishing limits there. We've got whole cities, whole towns with the peripheral areas full of people who had left their own areas, rural areas, because they didn't understand the need to set limits, to auto-regulate when we're talking about technology and the idea of progress. Thank you. Carme, you want to add something? Yes, I can answer that. You've said sacrifice nature in benefit of your own welfare, did you say, or community? Community. Well, I think the human being, I'm going to say, the human being, in inverted commas, a rich human being, has sacrificed nature in their own benefit. And I'll explain that, because the human beings who cultivated the land were very careful, because once they'd planted potatoes, they did wheat somewhere else, and then they changed around, because that made the soil much healthier. It was less profitable, maybe, but it was better for the earth. They didn't have to use insecticides or herbicides. These were in the olden days, our grandparents. On the other hand, the rich human being, being so ambitious, it is destroying the earth. In England, they said that one of the richest people in England is the man who is using fracking to get hydrocarbons from the earth, injecting water, sand 2 kilometers in depth, and take hydrocarbon from slate. This is the richest man in England. He's the one that's most in favor of Brexit, because in Europe we have a good regulation. There is one person who is destroying his own earth in his own benefit. Fumigation, for example, in Latin America, in Putumayo. This is an area where they cultivated coca, what they're going to fumigate. So what happened then? Well, the women were affected just in the same way as with the insecticides here. They had miscarriages, and it acts as this insecticide acts as an endocrine disruptor. The human being, the rich human being, is affecting nature in his or her own benefit, and the community must do something. I agree with you, solidarity, respect, etc., instead of the group of transhumanists who want to have a new elite that dangerously is similar to some experiments that were carried out by a madman in Germany. Genetically manipulation without ethical principles is a real danger. One last question from that young person over there, and with that we'll finish this session. Hello, I'm a student of baccalaureate. I would like to congratulate the speakers. I have a question. We, as new generations and society in general, how we can defend ourselves from all of this? Based on your advice is very good, but I would like to refer to created interest. Our grandparents, for example, 50, 60 years ago, didn't believe were essential, but now in the 21st century we believe are key elements, or we couldn't live without them. It is clear that we're living in a globalized world, for both for good and for the bad, and we have to fight against interests of very powerful people. As a student, as I am, it would be very difficult. So I would like to know if you could give us some advice from how we, from our humble position, can establish a difference, lead to a change, because the debate has been on the table for many years now. I mean, people whose own interests go against taking the measures that would be necessary. More than advice, it would be an opinion. Firstly, get information. The world is enormous. It's not just Europe and the US. In many places in the planet, there are events or alternative criteria to those that appear in the text. If you can travel, do so. Get to know the world, because that enriches you. It is true that sometimes we consider humble criteria and we think, well, how could they oppose the powerful industries? In the history of mankind, there are certain concepts that took a long time to affect us. The idea of equality, for example. Nobody discusses the idea of equality, but some time ago, this was not even possible. Women, for example, didn't participate in the political life. They weren't able to, but now, discussing this, there's no reason to discuss it, because that debate has been closed. We have equality today. Many questions insofar as the planet warns us of the needs, the consequences. There are many concepts that we have been discussing. The Silent Spring must be upgraded, must be updated, and they're going to be discussed, and we're going to have to assume a political posture. We have to take this political posture. You can't be indifferent. It doesn't matter if you lose. What we have to do is assume things. Often we are told that the academia is an objective, a scientific place, that you don't need politics. And that's not true. The academia is impregnated with ideologies. What we have to know is who that ideology belongs to. Would it benefit us? Well, do we agree with that ideology? We have to take up a posture. We must try to understand why things occur. And with those two opinions, I think we can do a lot of things. And you've got a lot of work ahead of you from now on. The water level is rising. We have intense rainfall. The news on the news, terrible. A document was signed in Paris where certain powers did not want to participate, and this should lead us to reflect about the destiny of mankind and your responsibility. I agree with, there are two pieces of advice. Use the principle of caution in our daily lives is a good thing if we don't become obsessive, because there are a lot of people who are affected by some illnesses who have to watch over so many things, become obsessed. I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to even breathe. We must know, I believe more in the you must depend on a network, talk with other colleagues, use the networks that already exist, use the ecological movements, public health movements that already exist, and form groups, form clusters to be able. This was Marta Angel, for example, in a scientific journal. She achieved one thing first. First of all, that the women became visible in science, and then afterwards, that the conflicts of interest came out as a rule that prevents this. And the second thing, and I'll finish with that, we must learn how to survive in a hostile world, because the Neolithical times occurred, and they had to survive. We have to survive with a mobile phone, with a lot of things. Not using we use the mobile.
Ponemos.
And the fingers is like 2 centimeters away from your ear. And finally, transhumanism and genetic manipulation. Those who try to set up a world elite on transhumanism, I wonder whether you have thought that genes represent only 46% of our health, and the rest is responsibility of the environment. So even that potential elite, either they live in a bubble or they will also be affected by EDs and electromagnetic fields. Even if their genes are highly manipulated, they will have to take into account that even transhumanism experts will have to work so that all these new issues do not impact them. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to all the participants of this debate. Thank you to both speakers, and thank you to you all for attending this interesting panel. Now we have some time for coffee break and some sweets I'm sure there are preservatives in those sweets, so be careful.